Better to be a gardener in a war. There's this saying that goes, better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, which makes sense when you think about it on the surface level. But if you actually know anything about history, the military, psychology, then you start to see how wrong that is really quick. For most of history, a warrior was never actually a full-time warrior. He was a gardener, a farmer, a butcher, a miner, a merchant, something else. People had their personal and professional lives, and then when war is declared, only then are they trained to be a warrior. Generally, this person only grabbed a uniform and a weapon when absolutely necessary. It wasn't their full-time job. Now, there are, of course, exceptions. There were professional full-time soldiers and people like that, but they're rare compared to everyone else who was doing the fighting, especially when you look at anything in human history before World War II. It's actually relatively easy to turn a gardener into a warrior, at least at the basic level. Are they going to be a badass Delta Force operator after, a few months of training? No, but they will know enough to kill people and break stuff and defend territory, which is pretty much all people need. If you look at history and current events, it seems to be mentally better for people who have something to return to after a war, after a critical incident. A gardener goes back to being a gardener. A gardener goes back to the garden itself. They love the peace, the flow, the work of the garden before they had to fight, bleed, and kill. And now they still love the peace of it. Maybe they love it even more. Maybe it's a healing to their tortured soul, or maybe they're not tortured, or maybe they're just find it relaxing. Whatever. The point is, full-time warriors seem to have a lot of problems with integration, attaining some level of peace. They are the people who can't seem to relax at all, can't seem to walk into a Starbucks without being at red alert for danger, can't sleep at night, can't transition back because there's nothing to transition back to. Now, this is a generality, and there's a lot of complicated psychology to stuff to explain reasoning behind this. But for right now, just take my word for most of it, and let me give you some of the basics of what might be causing this. Number 1, hypervigilance. If you've experienced trauma, one of the beliefs you might be working under is, if I let my guard down, that's when a predator is going to get me. That is when everything is going to fall apart. Now, this can be conscious or unconscious, but either way, the idea is I need to be constantly on red alert. The real danger is in closing my eyes. Unfortunately, psychologically unfortunately, if you actually are in a dangerous situation, hypervigilance is actually a really good survival mechanism in the short term. You are being hunted. You do need to stay awake. The moment you close your eyes, you might actually die. The problem is in the long term. Generally, none of us are hunted that much. The problem in the long term is that you're not in the war zone anymore. You're not in the plains being hunted by wild beasts. You're back in the garden, back in the hometown, back in the middle of the high rise. But the hypervigilance and the terror behind it are still there. Your caveman brain is in survival mode and stuck there, despite the actual safety. Side note, one of the things that I do with my hypervigilant clients is avoid relaxation, at least to start. The idea is that relaxation triggers the terror of letting your guard down, causing this self-punishment cycle. The more I try to relax, the more panic I feel. Why? Because if I relax, that's when I'm going to get killed. If you're not ready for it yet, it can be a re-traumatization thing. But number 2. Intensity versus mundanity. After experiencing life or death situations, everyday civilian life can feel trivial. One of the things I see time and time again with my veterans and first responders are people who become adrenaline junkies and intensity junkies. They can't watch a horror movie. They need to watch the scariest films they can find, and in fact will clear their entire weekend to do a full marathon. They can't just go to work. They have to work until they exhaust themselves. The intensity here is, the concept here is that slow and steady, or even just working at a sustainable pace, feels like waste. Some people even equate it to a moral sin, a moral violation. If I'm leaving anything on the table, then I'm committing a sin. The standard is impossible, at least in the long term. But a garden, or anything like a garden, doesn't really ask for that. Show up, water some plants, pull some weeds, and let the sun and the earth handle the rest. For some people, that lack of intensity is anathema. That pace feels like hell. Or really, to put it simpler than that, peace feels like hell. I'm not doing enough. Let me make this even more simple. You are what you do. Which leads me to number 3. Impossible standards and moral injury. Moral injury is a psychological distress resulting from actions or experiences that violate a person's moral beliefs and values. Generally, you need to have one of these components: perpetuation, betrayal, or witnessing. Perpetuation is when you commit an act that goes against your moral beliefs. Betrayal is when a person or institution betrays your trust. Witnessing is when you observe others commit moral violations that you cannot or will not prevent. Now, generally, these are also tied to the word shame and also the word powerlessness. Something occurs that is out of your control, where you are under so much duress, so much external pressure, that you end up taking actions you would not otherwise do. Now, with normies, this means I did something bad or something bad happened. I need to make amends, rectify this somehow, get some healing around this. But military and first responder training emphasizes that your actions matter. Lives depend on you. Failure is not an option. I always hate that one. I hate failure is not an option so much. They assume they should be able to control the uncontrollable. This creates a cognitive framework where every negative outcome must be someone's fault. If I had been faster, smarter, more vigilant, I could have saved them. Instead of terrible things happened, it becomes I am terrible for letting this thing happen. This transforms tragic circumstances into personal failures, even when the outcome is objectively beyond their control. Now, this leads to this perpetual self-punishment cycle. Self-punishment here is this ongoing, maybe unconscious process where individuals continually inflict suffering on themselves as penance for perceived moral failure. It becomes a way of life rather than a temporary response to guilt. This shame, this perpetual self-punishment, then becomes self-sabotage. It's not just, I don't like being a gardener. It becomes, I don't deserve peace, so I'm not going to let it come in when it's offered to me. And number 4, the identity disruption. For many warriors, the military identity, the first responder identity is all-encompassing. Transitioning to another role or another profession means losing a clear sense of purpose, belonging, and definition. The question becomes, who am I without this role? That creates a significant existential anxiety. If you are what you do, then there's this idea that being anything other than a warrior takes away from that warrior identity. It's a lack of nuance. It's a black or white cognitive distortion. If I am not constantly a badass, then I am never a badass. If I cry once, I'm a weakling forever. I hate this concept with my whole being. I really do. This entire idea I can't be soft ever. Because that was the culture, and it's disgusts me. Lack of nuance is celebrated in the military and first responder cultures. The idea that you can be more than one thing at a time, or that you can be in a role for a portion of your life and change to a different role with completely different values, actions, expectations, is really seen as weakness or waffling or lacking conviction. I genuinely think that this level of rigidity is the underlying source of most of their problems. So, I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I had a 430-day deployment with 10 months in Iraq. When everyone else was getting laid and drunk at 19, I was in the desert with a rifle. No, I didn't do anything badass. I was not getting into knife fights with Osama bin Laden, but I was there, and they were tossing mortars to kill me, and I got my honorable discharge out of the U.S. military. which a lot of people don't get. I was a soldier. That was one of my roles, an aspect of my identity, an aspect of my existence. It was not my full identity. It wasn't even a biggest part of my identity. There were other things, other demographics, other concepts that I was really striving for more than being that. And that's okay. It was not my only role. So much so that when it came time to take off the uniform, it was very easy. I transitioned to other roles, and it was fine. A gardener can be a warrior for a season, and then go back to the peace and the ease of being in the garden. A warrior, a full-time warrior, or maybe just someone stuck in that identity, a warrior seems to rebel against the garden, against peace, against being anything other than this singular role. He might try to be a gardener for a season, but he's not actually taking that identity on to the extent where they can feel at peace with it. Probably also thinks that gardening makes him lose his edge, or that relaxation is going to lead to his death, or that peace makes his balls fall off, or that his friends are going to make fun of him because he likes flowers or something. It sure as hell won't work in the long run. Anyway, these are just some generalities and ideas, completely anecdotal. I wanted to offer some clarity about why some veterans and first responders don't seem to be able to integrate in civilian life, why there are so many homeless vets, issues in relationships, addictions, etc., etc. Don't send me counterexamples about how your Uncle Jim, who was a gardener and got bitten by a radioactive Navy SEAL, and now he's a garden warrior and he uses his trowels and his plant knowledge to fight evil. Anyway, if this is resonating with you, what you might need is to learn how to be more than one just thing, one role, one archetype. Maybe it's time to transition to a new role with more peace. Let go of some of this rigidity and see what else you can be. If you or someone you know wants to learn how to do this, maybe it's time to see someone like me.